So today's session, we're going to run through a couple of points on cybersecurity that I think a lot of our customers have been talking about, and certainly we've heard about in the market a lot. So um, one of the things we'll hit is why cybersecurity should be top of mind for both IT and OT leaders. We'll talk a little bit about whose responsibility cybersecurity is. We'll talk about how IT and OT work together there. Um, we'll spend a little bit of time on data strategy and enterprise architecture. And then we'll talk a bit about industrial connectivity and how having a strategy there can really help power modern and distributed architectures that can be more secure. And then we'll talk a little bit about the importance of connectivity for securing OT data. And Tom, you've got some really cool customer examples, right?
I do. Yeah, I'm really excited to share those with you, Ted. Um, I think we should just really jump right in and start talking about some of the capabilities that are required for OT security. But before we do that, like Ted, why is OT cybersecurity becoming more critical for manufacturers?
Yeah, it's definitely been a hot topic this year in the early year shows that we've been at, and we're hearing more and more of it from customers. And I think there are a couple things driving this. There is definitely a very different geopolitical landscape than there has been in the past. I think starting starting in the early 2000s and continuing right on through, we've seen an increase in how geopolitical risks are resulting in cyber attacks and ransomware institutes. So McKinsey did a study in 2022 and took a look at this and saw an 87% increase in those types of incidents across all industries, including manufacturing. So it's really on the rise. Um, and it's not just IT. I mean, I think it's also OT. The Wall Street Journal has been looking at this for a little bit, and they reported 905 known strikes last year, and that was up 50% over the year prior. And that's very consistent with what we've seen in other sources. So not only is the overall landscape becoming more risky, but manufacturers seem to suffer at a disproportionate rate than other industries. And we can think about examples that you and I have lived through, things like Colonial Pipeline, Aliquippa Water. Those are pretty well-known examples, and those types of attacks on things like water systems and pipelines get a lot of visibility, but they're certainly not the only ones. Um, I think when you look at what's going on in the manufacturing space specifically, that same Wall Street Journal report I was talking about earlier reported a 28% increase in groups specifically looking at and targeting operational technology year over year. So that is certainly something that's concerned a lot of our customers, and we hear a lot about it in the industry.
Yeah, that's I mean, obviously concerning some of these really infrastructure-based attacks that are occurring and getting all of that publication. With that happening, like, are there are governments taking any sort of role associated with this, whether it's the United States or the European Union or other governmental agencies?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things we saw recently was NIS2. So that is the revision of the 2016 NIS Act in Europe. And this is the one that requires all member states in the EU to impose regulations on the entities that operate and offer services in their space. So this now makes organizations responsible for securing their own environments if they operate in the EU. And it's really broadened the scope and clarified the rules of NIST and made organizations more accountable. So this sort of rolls the responsibility for securing your environment and making sure that you are mitigating cybersecurity risk back on manufacturers and the companies that serve them. There's more oversight. There's steeper penalties, including up to 2% of annual worldwide turnover from those companies. Senior management teams now need to be held more accountable for any type of failure to adhere to the NIS2 regulations. And there's increased incident reporting obligations, right? We know sometimes organizations don't like to talk about cybersecurity attacks or ransomware attacks in their environment. NIS2 requires them to make that more visible. I think with the intent of helping everybody learn, but it sure can be uncomfortable for manufacturers to admit that they've had an incident.
And that's absolutely true. And, we've heard of manufacturers keeping things under the wraps for a while, and it's really great that NIS2 is doing that. But as a European regulation, is there impact to non-European companies? I mean, such as that are operating in that area as well?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, if you offer services in the EU, this could impact you. And also, if you are a supplier or a buyer for someone who is manufacturing in Europe, this is also part of your supply chain considerations. And it's significant, right? I mean, for companies that suffer cybersecurity attacks, they may not be able to ship products, they may not be able to bring in supplies, they may not be able to bill or report income. So these attacks are extremely disruptive. And I think we're seeing is, the cost of doing nothing is definitely increasing. So when we look across the manufacturing environment, one thing that I think a lot of industry analysts are finding is that manufacturers are largely underprepared for cybersecurity and ransomware attacks. And the focus has traditionally been on physical security. So things like air gapping the factory, having swipe cards, or trying to separate the network. And many companies are starting to become more aware that there is a risk associated with cybersecurity, but their people, policies, and procedures may be a little bit behind when it comes to being proactive and taking a stance there.
Thanks, Ted. I'm interested, we're talking about NIS2 and the impacts there. Who's responsible for making sure that OT is secure? Is it the IT side, OT side? Like, who's doing the work there in companies?
Yeah, that's a great question. And as we've seen regulations push more of the responsibility for avoiding cyber security risk back on organizations and in particular manufacturers, that dynamic is really changing. Historically, if you were to ask an organization who's responsible for securing your technology environment, that would have been an IT organization, and they have traditionally been very responsible for all things cybersecurity. Think about, from the time that computers first moved into the office. Uh, but the growing risk of OT cybersecurity incidents really raised questions about how OT security should be managed and by whom. And they're really different perspectives, right, between OT and IT about security. IT security policies are really about information confidentiality and integrity and availability, whereas OT is mostly about maintaining uptime and efficiency. And you certainly can't make anything if your systems are down. So very different mindsets and somewhat different approaches in terms of how security is conceived within those two areas of the organization. So we think, this is really an opportunity for IT and OT to partner and for IT to understand the best practice within OT and for OT to really learn from some of the things that IT organizations have been successful with in the past when securing technology environments. There is a big difference between, software systems and personal computers in the office and things like manufacturing networks and control systems. And we think that's a great time for these two groups to come together to think holistically about securing the environment.
That makes a lot of sense, Ted. And you're talking about the people within IT and OT. And since I've been in the industry for right about 10 years at this point, I've seen a shift of the IT and OT groups sort of in some instances coming together. We've got different levels of maturity of those blending. But at the end of the day, somebody needs to be responsible for cybersecurity. Who is that within organizations today?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we're starting to see an emergence of this CISO role, right? Um, in industrial companies, and it tries to bring together OT securities and sort of this C-level executive leadership approach to securing the environment. But again, these considerations really have to span both OT and IT and apply kind of a defined governance model to make sure that the people, the procedures, the technology, right, they all follow the objectives of the organization to minimize risk and avoid cybersecurity attacks.
That individual probably has a pretty tough job, I assume, in companies.
Absolutely.
Because cybersecurity is often at odds with other business initiatives for manufacturing, especially, digital transformation, getting all of the value out of your data, which means providing access. And so how can manufacturers justify the investment in cybersecurity to avoid that risk?
Yeah. It's over 25 years in this industry, Kepware has seen a number of these cybersecurity breaches, and they're hugely disruptive. We were working with a customer recently that had a cybersecurity incident, and it shut down their entire network, including very simple things like the ability to label the inventory coming off the line and then make that available to buyers, as well as understand what was even in production. They went overnight from a computer-based network system on the plant floor to paper and pencils again, and had to rely on folks who had been with the factory for a number of years and remembered those old procedures, those pre-network procedures, to help guide the organization through it. So I think the first step we think is really important, and that we see in organizations that have experienced an event like this, is to shift the mindset and attitudes and look at cyber resilience and risk minimization as a business priority and enable that throughout the organization and throughout the entire supply chain where possible. It's critical, in our view, that cybersecurity be tied not only to risk, but that the investments in cybersecurity are tied to clear business outcomes. And I think that has some nice knock-on effects for companies that are working on digital transformation. So, Tom, you talked about data security transformation earlier in our conversation, and a lot of the investments that organizations will look to make in cleaning up their digital household to prevent cybersecurity risk will also help with advancing digital transformation. Modernizing and securing your OT architecture and improving the integration with IT architecture, there's an opportunity there for organizations to create seamless access to valuable OT data on the shop floor. And that data is really the foundation for digital transformation for many companies. So whether you're looking to improve visibility and performance of the shop floor, identify sources of scrap or opportunities to improve OEE, um, or even places where you might be able to increase automation, those are great opportunities to also apply a cybersecurity risk minimization strategy to your environment. So I think there is an opportunity to think about standardizing things like your operational connectivity with a tool like Kepware as part of getting your digital house in order for both digital transformation and minimizing cybersecurity risk.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Ted.
Yeah. So, Tom, one thing that I wanted to ask you a little bit about is industrial connectivity and thinking about that in the framework of security. So, how does industrial connectivity, in your view, improve the security of OT networks?
Absolutely, Ted. And one of the big things there is making sure that you're securing that data in motion, right? So using an industrial connectivity solution to do protocol translation can be a really important part of your security strategy. Converting what are traditionally insecure protocols by their design, and there's no fault with them, they're great protocols, but nowadays we need to put those into a more secure protocol. So like conversions between Modbus and MQTT or OPC traditional into OPC UA, something that's got the modern capabilities like OpenSSL embedded into them. On top of that, it's important to do network segmentation. This ensures that companies can have limited impact if a cybersecurity event does occur. Actors can't easily move from one area of the network into another. Another piece of that is really around not just like the data in motion, but from an access standpoint, like who and how individuals can access the data, not just individuals, but also applications as well. So having granular controls on that access is really important, and having an application that can provide it, like Kepware, at the very detailed level, per tag, per item, is really important. That ensures that the right applications only have access to the right data at any time, minimizing the overall threat surface that is available to any particular bad actor. And lastly, something that I think that Kepware does a really good job of overall is around making sure that we are providing to the market up-to-date versions, specifically for updates to security. There are regular reports that things like OpenSSL or other protocols have um, that there have been discovered security issues within those protocols. And we we put a lot of effort into ensuring that our application has the most up-to-date versions and is the most secure as possible at the time of publishing. And customers need to take those on and ensure that they're updating their networks and their infrastructure with up-to-date applications, operating systems, so that they can have a limited threat surface as well in that case.
Yeah, I really like that. I think one of the things that that's changed in the environment, right? Used to be customers would download the connectivity solution they needed to make a point solution connection and then leave it in place for a number of years. I think what I hear you saying is that's just not sufficient anymore.
It's not. You're absolutely right, Ted.
Right. And the old model used to be that the OT network was air gapped away from the corporate networks, right? So there was a theory that there was not as much risk there. But I think there's a recent study that you pointed me at that showed something like 22 connections between the typical OT environment and the typical corporate IT environment. And those are potential access points that didn't used to exist and maybe exist today.
Yeah, companies tended to not think about the fact that their ordering system or um, that their supplier systems are tied in any way into their OT network, but any sort of transition between them, whether it's order numbers or providing that data out to the vendor to make sure that you're getting your product in to make the final product, those are all connections that are happening, and were often overlooked as something that could be a security risk.
Right. Yeah. And we've seen some of these recently too, right, Tom? You've got a couple of great examples of Kepler customers who have been using our industrial connectivity solution to help minimize cybersecurity risk.
Yeah, I really want to focus on one in particular, and it's a global paper manufacturer who was one of those companies that thought network segmentation and air gapping was, or that network segmentation was not really that important, and that air gapping was their solution to things. And that turned out not to be the case. They suffered a very large cybersecurity incident that took a lot of their manufacturing capabilities out of pocket and cost them a lot of money. Um, but what they've done since then is gotten together with internally and decided on a new architecture for their network systems, ensuring that they have a much more resilient, established protocols between those different network segments. So not only are they doing what we would call north and south segmentation, so from your OT network up into your IT systems or your business systems, they're putting breakpoints in there. Specifically, they're doing even more than what most customers have traditionally done by uh, not only putting in a DMZ where they're separating those two networks, but they have limited the ability for data to transition between those networks to one specific protocol, and that protocol happens to be OPC UA. They are using a variety of other protocols upstream of that. MQTT is one of them to put their data into a couple of different cloud capabilities for future use. Um, but any transition of data from one network segment to the other is being done with OPC UA. And one of the interesting things, Ted, that they're doing is because they have so many legacy systems, specifically with OPC DA, they're converting that DA into UA and in some cases back once they've transitioned those network segments because of even their legacy applications that can only consume OPC DA today. And lastly, on top of that, in addition to that, they're also doing what they call east-west transitions. So you might have part of a plant that really shouldn't or need to often talk to each other. So whether or not it's the paper machine talking to the pulping system, which may be necessary in limited cases, but they're also doing that over OPC UA to ensure the highest level of securities are available.
Yeah, it's such an amazing recovery from a really adverse business impact from a cybersecurity event, but as a means of recovering that has really secured their network. And if I recall correctly, I think they also used those investments in securing the northbound data flows between OT and IT to get a grip on their machine wear and tear and be able to do better preventative maintenance and also predict when those machines were going to need to be replaced. So that's a place where an investment in minimizing cybersecurity risk also led to more digital transformation opportunities for the organization.
Yeah, that's absolutely great for them to have done that. They took that, what was really a horrible incident for them as a business, and turned it into an opportunity to find places to not only save money, but to make a little bit more through those processes. It was been a really great story to work with them on.
Right. Well, that concludes, I think, the stuff that we had to go through today. I think we may have some opportunities for Q&A from the audience.
Yeah, let me look through real quickly and see what we have here.
I
Ah,
see one here on vulnerabilities from OT networks. You seeing that one?
yeah, Ted, I'll take that one. The question is, what are the biggest vulnerabilities in OT networks? And the thing that comes to mind first is legacy protocols. Those protocols were designed initially to ensure that different devices work together, and they do an amazing job of that. But nobody thought about cybersecurity when those were produced. And even today, some of the major vendors of PLCs and other devices are leveraging those protocols because they're so well established and so important to manufacturing that they just can't change them right away. So we need to layer on top of that the ability to secure those protocols and convert them into something that has encryption associated with them.
That's great, Tom. And the job for OT has really evolved here, hasn't it? From measuring and managing OEE to thinking about securing their environment. Yeah,
That's absolutely right.
challenge, real challenge. Um,
Ted, here's another
Go
one
ahead.
for you, or I think you would be good for. Does Kepler support modern protocols and standards like OPC UA?
Thank you for pulling that one out of the queue. I love that one because absolutely we do. So the Kepler server today has an OPC UA client driver. We also support UA through our UA gateway. And this is a place where Kepler has a long history of partnering with the OPC Foundation to think through and continue to advance what manufacturers need from their UA stack and also how to make that secure and robust against outside threats. So we absolutely support both UA and MQTT in the server and translations among different protocols to help customers be more secure without having to rip and replace everything.
That's right.
Tom, here's one for you. Uh, where do you get started on securing OT data?
Uh, that is the perfect question in general, just for any company that is looking at the landscape and understanding that they need to do something but don't know where to go. I've had the pleasure of talking about this for a while now because of the maturity curve of organizations. Some thought about this years ago, and others are just getting into it. The biggest thing is going to be people and processes because it is the people in IT and in OT that are in charge of making sure that this happens. And there needs to be agreements and understanding of how the different groups want and need to work. And then setting those processes into place once you've decided the best way to go. There's tons of information from a variety of different vendors of IT and OT systems that can help out pointing you in the right direction, but really people and processes are going to be the foundation of getting started for securing your OT data.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. And that change of mindset to think about cybersecurity as part of your daily responsibilities is a big one for a lot of organizations that we work with.
It is.
There's another one in here. It talks about PTC and the security of Kepler products. So I'll grab that one. We test our products both internally for security, and we also use external opportunities to test the server for security. So things like benevolent hacker groups, as well as interoperation groups, to get a third set of eyes or a fourth set of eyes on the security of our server. I think we see security and connectivity as going hand in hand here, right? Like the benefits of connectivity only really accrue when you can be confident that you are secure and that you're supporting the types of protocols and data transmissions that you need to run the business effectively. So we take it really seriously. I think, Tom, I'm trying to remember, I can't recall the last time we did a software update that didn't at least include an update or some additional considerations for how to make the server more secure. And we do those 4 times a year. So, um, that is a cornerstone for Kepware. And I think Kepware customers can feel really confident knowing that we go through that work and that we're actively looking at additional certifications.
Absolutely, we are. And once we get through those, we will be excited to share those with everyone on this call.
Yeah, absolutely.